Hello and welcome to Black Hat News. I'm Dave Jemmett, the CEO of CISO Global, a NASDAQ-listed cybersecurity company. This is where leaders come from around the world and talk with me about the problems they see in cyber, the future of AI, as well as other issues they've learned from, whether it be a hack or someone they've actually been associated with that has. So with that, some of my coworkers, my CISO, actually will have another episode called You've Been Owned. And that's Gary Perkins will actually start a podcast talking about people who have been hacked, other CISOs, as well as security advisors and executives. So with that, today is our first podcast, and I get to welcome a very good friend of mine who I've known for quite a long time, as well as the CEO of Hivelocity, Jeremy Pease.
Thank you, Dave. Happy to be here with you.
I appreciate you being here, especially flying all the way from Dallas or Austin.
Yeah, of course. No, I mean, you said we had an opportunity to do this, and I said, I'm there. You let me know when, and I'll be there for you.
Great. And I'll always be there for you. So with that, companies don't understand, a lot of them don't understand the cybersecurity risk and really what's out there. And I always liken it to the pandemic. No one has actually seen the virus. Well, unfortunately, the same thing happens with virus and malware and hackers. They don't see it until it's too late, and they catch it, and it's just not a cold. It can actually really mess up an organization reputationally, monetarily, freeze records from clients. So what we're here to do is talk about a little about your background, and I'd really like you to talk about Hivelocity and explain what it does.
Absolutely. No, appreciate that. And yes, it is a reality of dealing with the information technology space as a whole, right? In terms of what's out there, how does it affect your business? How could it affect your business? How do you prepare yourself? So it's such a crucial part of what I see, as a CEO of Hivelocity, but through multiple companies over the last 20 plus years of being in this space is how do you protect yourself? How do you manage that? So me personally, I've been in the data center cloud hosting space for a little over a decade now, ranging from companies like hosting.com to Contigix to DataBank, who's a large data center provider, to now being the CEO of Hivelocity. And Hivelocity really is a data center cloud hosting bare metal provider with over 50 data center locations across 6 continents. And we really are here to provide a secure cloud solution for customers across the globe that need real low latency solutions in a secure, dedicated environment that is easy and really easy and affordable to consume.
I appreciate that. So again, thank you for flying up from Austin.
Yep.
But more importantly, let's really dive into it. So you have been in 5 data center companies.
Yes.
Right? I've known you quite a long time.
Correct.
So starting with hosting.com.
Yep.
So through those, you hosted tens of thousands of clients through all those different data centers.
Correct.
Right? You've been through M&A.
Yes.
So maybe you can share a lesson learned, essentially what I'm thinking of. Tell me, have you had an issue in the past with cybersecurity or an incident that may have taken place?
Yeah, I wish I could say that I haven't and that everything's perfect, but unfortunately that's just not the case. I have at different companies seen incidents occur. Right. Ones where, as you said, unfortunately, sometimes you don't know until things are probably in a worse space than you want it to be. Right. And so we have had that happen. But I've also been at companies where because of those experiences, I said, day one, come in, evaluate where we are in terms of our ability to manage our cybersecurity within an organization, not only for ourselves, but for our customers. When you're managing and taking care of the infrastructure for thousands of customers, obviously that's a critical component of it, right? So there's one company that I started at back in 2017. I came in, started to dive into what was going on the IT side. That includes cybersecurity. What are we doing from a posture perspective? And I really started to not fully believe that we were in the ideal space that had kind of been sold to me in the beginning. And so I had an outside consulting firm come in, take a look at what was going on. And I mean, when people actually start to get exposed for what is happening in those types of situations, it's amazing how they can react. And in this situation, the CTO that was there basically could not answer the questions that were necessary, packed up a box and walked out, and we never really heard from him again. So, we realized that we had some challenges ahead of us. Obviously, getting someone from the outside to manage that for us was extremely helpful. They identified the areas of weakness. You look at criticals, highs, mediums, and lows, as you well know, and then we started to address those one by one. But that's why it's critical from the beginning to understand, where do you stand, where can you get better, and how can you continue to provide a secure environment for your customer base.
And if I recall, that was an M&A.
It was. That was one of the companies that we acquired. We were only about a couple months into having acquired that company. And it was interesting to watch a co-founder walk out the door that quickly because they just weren't prepared for the questions, and we weren't as in a great place as we thought. So, at the end of the day, it really worked out for the organization. We put ourselves in a much better spot, and we were secure from there on out. But it's definitely interesting when you walk in the door, you have those types of conversations. They can answer the questions, and they're not sure what to do with that.
Wow. And so he just walked out.
Packed a box, walked out, and said, sorry, I'm done.
Wow. I wonder what that's like.
I don't know, and I don't want to be in that seat or that situation. For me, I've had the conversation with my employee base and my leaders in each role that I've been in, is that compliance is important. I don't want it to be a check the box activity, right? And so many companies do that. It's a check the box. Did we get our SOC 2 audit complete? Do we have our compliance, whatever that is, ISO 9001, whatever. We worked through that and we checked all the boxes. I don't ever want that to be the case. I want us to know that we're actually secure, that we're doing the right things and being proactive. Even if you're doing all the right things, you can still run into some challenges, but I don't want to be at a place of checking the box. I want to be at a place of being proactive, doing the right things, not only, again, for us as a company, but for our customers as well.
Okay, I have a follow-up question. Are you angry at the person or the organization that had that CTO walk out?
Not at all. Not in the slightest, and only because I understand. It's a difficult position to be in. I think they were doing the best with what they had. And, it was kind of a conglomerate of putting a couple of different companies together. They were smaller companies, and I think they were trying to do the best that they could. But as you start to pull companies together and do that, you get larger as an organization. There's more expectations, and there needs to be more stringency around compliance and security and all those different components. So I understand that it was a challenging situation, and he just was ready to step away, and that was fine, because then it allowed us to dive in, figure out what we needed to do, and move forward without any previous thoughts or prejudice against how we would move forward from that.
Okay, so I want to go dig a little bit deeper. Because I seem to know that a little bit.
Yes, you do.
So the question is at that time, I believe you were an EVP. Was that correct?
SVP, yes.
SVP.
Yes.
So you were responsible, and they brought you in to a pretty messed up situation, but you recognized really quickly that might not be what is happening.
Yeah.
So you were astute enough to wonder, right?
Yeah.
You called somebody.
Yes.
They
called you.
Oh, okay.
I called you.
Yeah. So
yes.
they picked up the call immediately.
Yes, of course.
Brought out our folks and looked into it. And I still recall giving you that report, right? You had combined a lot of M&A.
Yes.
And there were different aspects of those organizations. Mm-hmm. Compliance, as you just talked about, right? Issues with hackers being in some of the clients.
Yep.
But most importantly, when that report was given to you, I really want you to share with the audience, how did you feel when you got that report? It was pretty lengthy, if I recall.
It was. There was a lot of work to do. And I would just say that the challenge for me was I didn't want to put that in front of my board right at that moment. And you and I had that discussion.
Yeah. How did it make you feel?
I I wish that better diligence had been done. Because to be clear, this was an acquisition that was done before I came over to run mergers and acquisitions along with product, right? So I didn't want to call anybody out at that level. All I wanted to be able to do was state to the board, we've identified a problem, it's important, and we need to rectify it. So obviously for the leadership, the CEO to approve bringing you guys in to take a look at it, they knew that I probably had a pretty good idea that something was amok, if you will, right? They had an idea. And then to be able to come back, and obviously the board would know that a co-founder walked out of the business, right? You can't hide that from them. But I didn't want to show them the report because that's not necessary. But it was more of, I said, okay, I at least know that I found it. I was accurate in my assessment. And it allowed me to go to the board and say, now we need to fix it. We need to make it right. And I understand that's an investment that you didn't anticipate to make on an acquisition that you just made, but we have to for the safety of the business and for the security for our customers. So it was hard in the moment, but I knew by doing the right thing in that situation, we were going to set the company up for success going forward.
So a clarifying question.
Yes.
I remember talking, you were very concerned.
Yes.
So what's important is our audience, our folks that may not be a CISO or a C-level, right? They may be watching it, but what's really important is you took the opportunity and said, there's a problem. Mm-hmm. And when you found the problem, you wanted to fix it. And a lot of people get into the C-level, oh my God, now you're a CEO, you know that. They don't want to bring you problems. Right. So when you took it to them, I still remember hero or zero. And because you had just come in, you could fix those problems, which you immediately started. They weren't going to give you a bunch of money to fix it all at once,
right?
But you fixed it over time.
Correct.
Right? So I actually want to applaud you. And I've said this before. It took a lot of guts to go before a board and tell them, a brand new board, backed by PE firm, right? And explain it. But I guarantee you that board appreciated what you did. And more people who hopefully people who are watching this will say, instead of hiding it or instead of saying, hey, I built this network or I just got in, they'll take the opportunity to say, hey, there's a problem and move it up the line. Because quite frankly, it took a lot of courage. But more importantly, where did that end up? Where'd you end up going because you fixed that problem?
I mean, a year later, I was the COO of the organization, right? Because they knew that I could take on the rest of the responsibility of managing that. Because again, it wasn't just about fixing that, but that was not my area. Just because I was over M&A and product, that didn't have anything to do with my area of responsibility. But they knew from my background that I knew what to do in that situation and how to handle it. And so, as you said, it took a lot of trust from their end, but I think they also understood where my intent was. And so, yes, from that, I wound up moving on to being the COO of the company. So again, I think to your point, which I think is absolutely critical, is a lot of people want to push that stuff down and try to handle it themselves. This is one of the things that I talk to my leaders about, regardless of what the situation is, regardless of what we're dealing with, is please don't ever let an issue rise to me in a way that you didn't bring it to me when it was your responsibility, right? Please make sure that you're bringing it to the table, because if I get, side smacked with something like that, then it's going to be an ugly situation. And I'm going to ask you why you never came to me. And when you say I was trying to handle it, it's the worst statement you can ever make to me, is I was just trying to handle it. And I know that people have really good intent with that, but it's just a matter of giving the leadership a culture of, trust me, we're here to help. We want to enable you to be successful. But if you don't bring the problems and escalate them to leadership that can help you manage that, then we can't be successful. So, I've had great mentors such as Art Zaley, such as Raul Martinick, right? As you know, and they've taught me that over time. And so that's why I was able to do that in that scenario. And it's why I try to make sure that my leaders understand I want them to do the same thing, because again, I want compliance, security, standardization, the things that we need to do as an organization. I want to make sure we're doing them right and not just saying, yeah, we're doing a good job. No, I want to know that we are.
So I'll say this, and probably, let's see if this makes the podcast. So as a leader, I think you've heard me say, you stand at the top of the hill and everything rolls downhill. Mm-hmm. But if you're a really good leader, when the wind changes, you know there's a problem at the bottom, and you got to go find that problem. And the issue is people need to understand, whether you have a title of a VP, manager, or employee, if there's a cyber issue, it's going to affect the whole organization, and not in a positive way.
Nope.
Which you've seen.
100%. I mean, one of the companies that I was at, I was only in for a matter of 3 months, and we had a major breach, and I was responsible for all customer relationships, and I had to have some really difficult conversations with some customers about data, that was breached and possibly accessed and all of that kind of stuff. And those are the worst things. Now, did we work through that? Did we manage all of that? We did, and we handled it accordingly. But those are the worst customer conversations I've ever had to have in my entire life. And so anything we can do to avoid that is extremely important. And so that's why, again, I try to make it as clear as I can. I have a chief legal officer that knows how I run security and compliance. I brought him in because he knows exactly what my expectations are. And I ensure any company that we look at, from experience, you've helped me do due diligence since that point, right? The first company we acquired right after that, we made sure that you guys came in and did true due diligence on the security aspects of that organization to make sure that they were solid before we brought them on board. And so that's something that I've just learned through the process is you got to make it within your own house. But if you are a company that's doing mergers, acquisitions, all that type of stuff, you think about IT diligence, financial diligence, all these points, but the compliance and security diligence is almost just as critical as any of the rest of it.
I wish that a lot of other leaders would actually say that and believe it. I had a Fortune 500 company, an attorney called me that knew me and said, they're going to buy a company. And they're a multi-billion-dollar company buying a $500 million company. But I can't get their compliance. And we haven't done a cybersecurity posture. So the CEO was kind enough to call me and go, I want to buy this company now. Yep. You got 2 weeks. Well, when we did our due diligence, I think it was TJ. Mm-hmm.
Great guy.
Especially in yours.
Super smart. I love TJ to death.
Yeah. Savant.
Yes.
So he actually found 1,000,001 records, medical records. I haven't said what company because we can't talk about our clients.
Of course.
But the issue is it would have cost them tens of millions of dollars.
Yep.
And if they didn't have tail coverage, which a lot of our viewers, if you buy a company, buy tail coverage so it stops, they're responsible. But what's really amazing to me is you have to have a legal opinion. You have to do your accounting. Mm-hmm. You have to do compliance. You don't have to do cyber.
Right.
And I think do you believe that should be one of the processes that you have to do in an M&A?
100%. I think the problem is that people think just because they check the compliance box that they've done the cybersecurity piece of it. I think that's the fallacy in the understanding of I've done my due diligence fully across the board. And so that's where we want to make sure, what is the cybersecurity stance? What is their security policies? Not just compliance standards, true security policies. How are they managing that? Is there any exposure? Can we do, different types of pen tests, whatever that is, to take a look at what their security stance really looks like? Compliance is not checking that box. You absolutely need to do an evaluation of the company's cybersecurity stance as it exists. I think it's one of the most critical pieces of that entire process.
Especially today's now. I mean,
100%.
It's just getting worse and worse. And that kind of moves us to the next phase I want to ask you about is AI. So AI has changed the world, and it will continue to change. You put that on top of cybersecurity, right? And now you have automated hacks. You have automated issues that they create to get into your networks. And it doesn't matter what company.
Right.
So you're aware of Andy McCain, late Senator John McCain's son, who runs Hensley Beverage.
Yep.
Multi-$100 million organization. Went and talked to him, and I said, he goes, I want to see before I get on the board what you do. We did an evaluation. Here's your high, medium, low. Yep. And he looked at me, and I did the same thing. Went through the gas network, to the main network, into
Customer
familiar,
environments. Yeah, no,
into the customer.
Yeah, well aware of this this process.
So with that, yes, I'm a geek.
Right.
So with that, I showed him, and I actually showed him CFO's computer, right? And his comment, which he's given me permission to talk about the company as a white paper, he said, "No one's going to hack me. I actually sell beer for a living.
Right.
Right? Okay, I'll take 80% of your money that's digital. You keep the 20%
Right.
for hundreds of millions of dollars a year, and I think I'll come out ahead."
Yeah.
So again, he got hacked 2.5 months later, 4 days afterwards. We got him fixed. But the issue is, how do we convince people, not just data centers or anything else, because AI is transforming even worse. Yep. How do we convince people? How do we get people to understand cybersecurity and how important it is?
Man, I mean, if you don't see the news and the fines that are being levied on these companies for the breaches, then I'm not sure what else, convinces you as you continue to look at insurance on the cybersecurity side, how that increase is in terms of cost because of the possible liability. It just, as you said, AI is bringing a whole new capability to the game. And I think that's one of the things where, don't ever go out there and try to say that you're not going to get hacked because of the kind of company that you are, right? Like, what was it, the CEO of LifeLock that went out there and did the whole commercial? Like, here's all my information. I'm saying, does he? Yeah.
7 hacks later. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the thing. Don't taunt these guys, because that's only going to make them want to come after you more. And I don't care how secure you are. Like, if they want to find a way in, the challenges these days are how good can you be at at keeping those out. So, I think it's just a matter of continuing to talk about it. Podcasts like this, anything that you say, how do we fix that? More and more exposure, more and more talk about it. I think, again, the fines that are being levied on breaches to major companies, that's got to be a wake-up call. The cost of the cyber insurance. And just, if you've been in that experience, it is a true wake-up call. It really is something that you just got to understand. So, I hope for those that are out there in that companies understand a need for a CISO or a partner to be your CISO, or somebody that is looking at that portion of your business is so critical. And I think it's just a matter of continuing to get the message out there, because I think the more that we've become so technologically savvy as, a country, a world, like everybody, I think they understand. I think more and more the youth that's coming up understands there's a security risk in what they're doing, just because of how much technology's been in their hands since day one. So I think it's just continuing to help organizations through communication say, guys, it's a real problem. We really got to dive into this and understand what's going on.
Well, I found, obviously working with our clients and future clients, a lot of them come through breaches. Yep. Unfortunately. Yep. But the CFO sees it a black hole, right? The IT people have built and designed their network, so they're like, we're safe. Yeah, just 2 weeks ago, a client asked us to look at their cybersecurity. The IT said, no, we're good. CTO goes, no, we built it. That was unfortunate, 2.5 weeks later. And we had to get involved, thank goodness, and quickly. But do you think the society is becoming numb because there are so many attacks? Marriott Starwood, CIA, DOD, a whole southern eastern border of all law enforcement was hacked. Walmart, Target, it's just 813 banks 2 weeks ago.
Right.
Are we becoming numb as a society, or is it we're just going to ignore it until it happens to us?
Oh, man, I hope not. I hope there's enough people that have been through it that they say, I'm going to do what I can to avoid that situation. But there is that piece of, man, it's happening out there, and people starting to feel a little hopeless, right? I think that's what you're getting to, of what can I do? Like, can I really protect myself enough? Again, that CEO of LifeLock really thought that he was going to be fine,
right? And
it was good, and they were fully locked down and protected. And so I think it's one of those things that I don't know if we're numb, or we just, as financial organizations who are always trying to do things, to move the business forward. It's one of those things, unfortunately, I think more times than not, it gets kind of left as the last thing on the budget list, right?
Right.
Like, I got to do all these other things, and those are going to grow revenue. So security's here, and yeah, it's important. But you know what? If we got to cut somewhere, this is where we're going to cut. And we'll just cross our fingers and hope that it all turns out okay, right? That we don't get hacked, that something doesn't happen to us. And I think that's the challenge, is that I think people don't see it as enough of a critical importance to the business that it gets looped into the budget accordingly. I think more and more large financial institutions have understood it, and that's why they lock down their systems to the length that they do and use older technology at times, because they don't want to advance to the new until they know they can fully lock it down. But I think more companies that come up, especially as you stated in this AI world, they're going to have to figure it out, because it's a real threat, and you've got to actually put some time and money towards it to protect your organization.
And it's not hoodies anymore. Back in 92, it was hoodies, right? It was the kids in basements.
Yes.
And they weren't really trying to attack anybody. They were actually just going to see if they could get in. Today, it's state-sponsored hackers from Russia, China, North Korea. 313 took all DJTs, Trump medias, all their files, and put it online. Right? So the question again is, with all these state-funded hackers and AI, and they're state-funded, so the companies, like China's building one of the biggest data centers for AI.
Yep.
Right? They're on a rush.
Yep.
To beat us. That brings us to the power consumption in these data centers. So it's enormous. When I was building data centers, we shrank it because of VMware. Right. And so I'm like, it's a commodity. Now the data centers are getting huge, and you can't get power.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Oh, this is a totally different ballgame. I mean, just to try and put it in a terminology that people can understand, just put real numbers to it. What you were talking about, when we thought about data centers, we were thinking about 20 to 30 megawatt data centers as being big data centers. Huge, right? Because we were able to put a rack of servers in, and on the high end, maybe 5 kilowatts, maybe 10 kilowatts, right?
Correct.
For a massive computing server rack at the time. And this is like 5 years ago. We're not talking about it like historical 20, 25 years ago of data centers. This is 5 years ago. And now they're talking about, we were just talking about this earlier today, they're talking about pushing 200 kilowatts per rack.
That's insane.
It's absolute insanity. So you think about going, wait, this is nearly like 1,000 times the power that we were thinking about per rack. And you think about that in a data center, it's an incredible amount of demand. And now people are talking about building 500 megawatt, 800 megawatt, gigawatt, multiple gigawatt data centers. Everybody goes back to Back in the Future, 1.2 gigawatts. Like, now it's a reality. Like, these people are building these data center campuses to be a gigawatt plus, which was never fathomable. Again, 5 years ago, 20, 30 megawatts we thought was big. And so now you think, well, is there power in the grid for that? There's really not. I mean, it was 2021 when the power provider in Northern Virginia said, we're not going to be able to provide the power demand until 2027. I mean, that was already showing, because Northern Virginia is one of the biggest data center markets in the world, if not the biggest, right? Tons of data centers out there consuming power. And now you're finding state to state, all these states are going, no, actually, you know what? You're going to have to pay me a certain amount, whether you're consuming it or not, because I've got to build out the infrastructure to do that. And so, the power is an absolute huge change in our industry, and trying to find out ways to do that, whether that's nuclear, whether that's green energy, whatever it is who can find the power? Where can you find it? How does that all work? And that'll tie into AI, because AI is the one that's pushing the power density within these racks. But it's also pushing a different way between the training models and the inference models, the end user inference models, in the way that the data center world is structured. So power is a huge challenge for the industry in the space right now. Everybody's trying to figure out how they can get it. I was just at a conference 2 weeks ago, and that was the main conversation over and over again. Who's got power? Where do they got it? How can we make sure that we've got access to that power to be able to build for the demand that's out there right now?
I mean, it used to be 25 to 100,000 square feet. We thought was huge. 200,000 was mega. Now they're building 1 million, 2 million square feet. And how are you going to power that? I mean, but we have to have that infrastructure to create the compute to run the AI.
Correct. Yeah, and I think that's the key is you started to see, this is where I was talking about the fact that training versus inference. Training data centers you're finding them in North Dakota doing, 400, 500 megawatts in North Dakota, which never would have been thought of because everybody was like, everything needs to be low latency, right? You're finding big builds in Wyoming, big builds in Reno. And a lot of them are going up north because it's colder up there.
Right.
So then you don't have to deal with cooling costs as much as you would down in the south when you're talking about these massive scale facilities. But all that to say, those facilities can be out remotely in the middle of nowhere because all the training's done without sending a lot of data out, right? It's learning. And so it's consuming data. That's what's taking all that power. Is it learning and understanding? And that's why they call those the training models. And so that's why you see this demand going out for those types of pieces. Inference is going to be a different piece. When it actually starts to get to the end user, you're going to start to have that low latency again. And then the compute's not going to be as high density as these. And so you're going to see a little bit of change in that. But we're still a ways away from getting to the point to where inference even gets anywhere close to where training is today. So there's a long tail of us being able to get there. And, again, you hear about these big data center builds spending billions of dollars and we're going to bring gigawatts worth of power. But if you look at those timelines, they're 2028, 2030. I mean, it's going to take a long time. So, the system is going to have to try to meet demand in any way that they can. But it's difficult to get these built, and it's still difficult to get them built because of the scale.
And I guess that kind of leads to, do you think AI will help actually change the way data centers are built or be more efficient? What are your thoughts about AI in the next 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's making it more efficient right now. I can tell you that much because we're just trying to figure out how to manage it. We're just trying to figure out how to be able to provide that amount of power and how to cool that technology. So, we're looking at we talked about this a little bit earlier. It is insane that you now have racks of servers, which you never wanted to get close to water before or any type of liquid before, right? That's a no-no. Everybody knows you don't want to spill coffee on your laptop. It's going to screw everything up. But now they're running liquid over a chip, and now they're fully immersing these racks of technology in liquid, because that's the only way you can cool them when they're creating that much power. So AI has completely changed the way that data centers do that, because you got to think, I'm pulling all this power, but now I'm doing it in so much less space. So the way that data centers are pulled together, the way that we deal with power, the way that we manage all of that, I don't know that it's helping right now because we're just trying to understand how to manage it. Now, will AI in the future, in the next 2 to 3 years, find a way to manage capacity in a better, in a better way? That could help. But I think that's just a matter of what we call PUE. Are we using the power in the most efficient way possible? I think AI will help with that. But there's a lot of learnings and pieces that have to come together for that. And I think, we're at least 2 to 3 years out before we get there, because, there's so much that we're just trying to meet demand for today. And
you just talked about the Google Megas data center, right? You talked about the AWSs. Microsoft's, right? They're coming up with new ways, turbines. I mean, it's not going to get there. Nuclear plants.
Right.
I mean, we have one in Arizona, and they're already at capacity.
Right.
So I guess what it comes down to, I want to ask you a serious question, because AWS has been breached. Google's been breached. Microsoft's been breached. Right. And they spend hundreds of millions of dollars on cybersecurity.
Correct.
And it's the one to many. So I always say, how do you outrun a bear? I run faster than you do.
Correct.
Right? So you want to get your cyber posture up to where they don't want to waste your time. They don't want to waste their time. They want to go after easier targets. But the state actors are going after the one to many, breaching the Microsoft or AWS, because how many thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of customers are in their data centers?
Correct. And large ones at that, like, impactful ones that bring value and data in a way that means something to those hackers.
Right. So how would you consider running all these data centers? How would you secure that? How would you stop that from happening?
Well, I think that's one of the things that we talk to our customers about is providing dedicated environments to them, right? I think that's a challenge when you think about the hyperscalers in general, right? The AWS, the Googles, and Microsofts, right? We refer to them as hyperscalers. And the way that they manage it, you really have all these customers in environments that are somewhat slated off and somewhat moved apart, but once somebody gets in, it's pretty easy to distribute across all that customer base. And that's pretty scary, right? Whereas if you put a dedicated environment for a customer, I mean, whitelisting IPs, right? Blacklisting IPs, like being able to get very, very sensitive to how you manage that for that customer, in incentivizing them into using things like IPS, IDS, on top of what they're doing. I think by being able to create dedicated environments for our customers where we're able to put all those layers of security on top of it, and they know that it's just their environment, it helps in terms of not being able to spread that across multiple customers. We know that they have, IPs that are coming in directly from their environments, and anything outside of that automatically is not within realm. Whereas when you're dealing with this at a global scale, you can't do that. How am I going to whitelist or blacklist IPs, in an environment if I'm getting customers from all over the world accessing a singular data center? And I think that's where trying to create those dedicated environments, it's one of the things we talk about all the time is, it's one of those 4 C's that we talk about. It's really compliance, but that means security for us. We can provide better compliance and security because we can create a dedicated environment that is more specified and protected directly to the customer.
That's a good answer, actually, dedicated. Because you can't really turn geofencing on. And for our audience, keeping it within the U.S. or keeping it in a geo area, you can't do that with international clients. And today, people are marketing all over the world. A small company can distribute anywhere. So they're at risk. Without geofencing, the only way you can do it is given a dedicated. So do you take responsibility for your clients from a cybersecurity standpoint?
We do, depending on the level of security that they are willing to take on from our organization, right? If they just want a server by itself and they want to be responsible for security, then we don't, because that's then their responsibility. However, if they turn security and compliance over to us, absolutely we take responsibility. And to your point on geofencing and all of that, that's why, we are in over, 50 data centers across 6 continents, is so that even when it's talking about having to do that within their own country, we can do that in different countries, whether that's Amsterdam, whether that's the UK, whether that's Singapore. We're talking to a customer right now in Cambodia, a financial institution, and they want to be able to have everything within a data center in their world, and we can provide that for them in a fully dedicated, secure environment. So it really comes down to, are you allowing us to run security for you? Yes, then it's on us. If you're running your own security, then it's on you. And that's really the customer, as we talked about. What are you willing to invest in your security at the end of the day?
Excellent. What a great conversation so far. We've covered a lot of ground.
Absolutely.
I guess I would like to, as we wrap this up, I'd really like to know what your perception of, because the data center landscape has changed so much, right? Because of AI, because of, the compute power itself, quantum computing, right? Which changes the game all of a sudden. And we could do another 2 hours on that.
Of course.
So give me your thoughts from 2 to 3 years from now, both cybersecurity, where you think it is, AI, and where the data center builds are going. Because most of our audience doesn't know. Out of Cybercrime Magazine, Steve Morgan quoted, and several other magazines, $10.5 trillion was caused by damage, stolen, or IP last year alone.
Wow.
So that's the 3rd largest GDP in the world.
Right.
They don't have overhead or taxes to pay, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, where are we in the next 2 to 3 years? Data center, AI, cybersecurity. My hope is that as much as AI can be utilized for the bad. It can also be utilized for the good, right? And that is where utilizing AI to do things to identify the bad actors in this world and be able to identify those threats and be able to handle those threats is the counter activity, right? AI is definitely used for that. It's one of those statements I heard a number of years ago, and I can't remember from where, but it's like, no matter what happens in this world, technology in general, people find a way to use it for the bad. But
Correct.
It's a matter of how hard do the people work to offset that with the good. And so I think over the next couple of years, as much as there's this automation on the other side to try and create hacks from an AI perspective, I think we're going to see some positives in terms of AI from a security perspective. We're working with a partner right now that is trying to build a self-healing AI-based cloud, right? That can automatically heal and manage that. Think about the same thing from a cybersecurity perspective. If the AI model can identify and mitigate attacks on its own, based on seeing this. Now, you got to continue to build that model. Again, it's about training. It's about learning. Companies like yours, the amount of data that you could put into a model like that would be absolutely impressive and valuable to an AI model that could do something like that. So I think that's where you're at there. In terms of cybersecurity, I link that to hopefully AI is helping from that front. To be able to help there. But I think it's just a matter of continuing to build and understanding, we kind of see a certain type of a hack and an incident that happens and we adjust to that, try to see how, from a cybersecurity perspective, we get ahead of some of this, right? How do we see things and the way that they're going to be attacked and the way that systems can be accessed to try and get ahead of that game? I think that would be huge in cybersecurity over the next 2 to 3 years. How do we not just keep learning and then fighting that and then seeing the next one and fighting that? Like, how do we possibly try to be more proactive rather than reactive in the space? And then data centers. Look, like I said, most of these builds are going 2027, 2028, even 2030 to be able to do that. So don't think things are going to change very much in the data center space other than everybody's going to be looking for power, which everybody's doing today. How can they get there? How can they make that happen? But most of what's actually going to be here in the next 2 to 3 years is already built. Because if it's not, you're not getting it built in the next 3 years. So, yes. I mean, in all honesty, I think that's the thing of where is the end in all of this build? Because when we're talking about gigawatts and gigawatts of power and all that kind of stuff, we're not going to be able to sustain that. And builds are going to continue to push out further and further, and more companies. I mean, Oracle said that they're technically what I refer to as book not build, but their projects that they have signed but aren't delivered yet is over $300 billion, right?
Yep.
And so that's OpenAI, that's CoreWeave, all these companies that have billions to hundreds of billions of dollars of contracts that have been signed that haven't been delivered yet. So it's there, the demand is there, but where does that stop? I mean, there's got to be some point where what we're doing from a data center perspective meets that demand and we start to find a normalization. And I'm hoping that happens in the next 2 to 3 years.
Well, hopefully you're ahead of it. You're starting to go for it.
Yep, absolutely.
So I just want to take this opportunity to thank Jeremy for being here on the Black Hat News. First podcast.
Absolutely.
So appreciate it and our friendship for as long as we have. But more importantly, hopefully our audience has learned a little about data centers, what the problems are, how cybersecurity is being addressed, and a little about Hivelocity. So how can we learn more about Hivelocity?
www.hivelocity.net. A lot of our information is out there in terms of the data centers we're in, the technology that we provide, latency competition against the hyperscalers and other competitors out there. So if you want to learn what we do, it's all there. And you can follow us on LinkedIn as well. We put a lot of content out there. So look up Hivelocity on LinkedIn or find us on the website.
Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate you having me.
Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to watch Black Hat News. This is the first podcast. We'll be having several more, and hopefully it's informative to the business leaders and others out there. We have a lot of great lessons learned, as well as things you've been looking for. I'd like to thank NextSpace for actually hosting us in this wonderful, beautiful facility, as well as Jeff and the Auto Video Group. So again, Look forward to seeing you next time. Learn, be proactive, and get secure.